Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be in London today. Virtually, of course, but still. One of the things that was important for me for 2021 was to be able to get the message out far and fast all across the globe. That is what we're doing. So we're happy to partner with our partners today, with Greenwich and the rest of the staff with the London Innocence Project. Thank you for having me. Thank you for those who are in attendance. Thank you for those who may not be in attendance, but may happen to listen a little bit later. As introduced, my name is Ricky Kidd. I was wrongfully convicted and I was charged in May of 1996 with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of armed criminal actions. It was a rough doozy for me at that time. 22 years of age, never been in trouble before, never realized that innocence was a real problem. At best, I thought I would be inconvenienced. The police department developed myopic thinking. They became very close-minded, they rushed to judgment, and they thought that they had the right person despite breadcrumbs of evidence showing that somebody else had actually committed the crime. Subsequently, I was charged. From that point on, my fate was sealed. Here's 2 reasons why my fate was sealed. 1, I encountered an overzealous prosecutor who ignored the facts of my innocence and other individuals' guilt. At the same time, simultaneously, I was appointed a Missouri public defender attorney who was overworked and overwhelmed. I believe in that 11 months, I've seen my attorney about 4 to 5 times at about 30 minutes apiece. And I like to say, even if I gave her an hour each time, which it was not, even if I gave her an hour each time, you're talking 4 to 5 hours, a young 22-year-old charged with double homicide, facing life without the possibility of parole. No way in hell did I have a chance of ever winning or proving my innocence at that time. It just wasn't going to happen. Much of the evidence that could have proved my innocence sat for many, many years undiscovered. That evidence sat for many years undiscovered. I then was headed to prison. I was headed to prison in March 24th, 1997. I went to prison. They had put me on that bus and they had sent me to a prison called Potosi Correctional Center. It's where they house death row inmates. And I remember walking through that narrow a hallway space it's called intake. It's a very, very narrow hallway space. The prison looked bleak. It looked grim. It looked like you was walking into a nightmare. And indeed, at the young age of 22, I faced a nightmare, a condition that most humans have no imagination, no ability to even stretch their imagination to understand. And at the same time, a place that no human being, or an experience rather, that no human being should ever have to experience. I remember walking inside and the officer telling me, say your number. I gave her my number. It's not your name when you go to prison. And she said, welcome to hell. And that's exactly what it felt like in 1997. I began a 23 nightmare living inside of hell. One of the worst things that can ever happen to an individual locked up. Once I was inside, I didn't know what to do. I did not know what to do. Never faced with a situation like that. I became suicidal. A cross between not wanting to die, but not wanting to live life without the possibility of parole for a crime that I absolutely did not commit. So I was in a quagmire. Do I find a way to take my life, or do I find a way to regain my life and my deserved freedom? And which one was easier to do? It seemed at the time that taking my life was the easier route to do. At the time they had thought that I was just depressed and that I was in denial, that I was not innocent. And Mr. Kidd, let us give you some psychotropic medication to help you deal with what you've done and why you've been sentenced, opposed to the fact of me actually being innocent. I took those pills and I noticed that they had the ability to slow my respiratory system down. And so I talked them into giving me a higher dose and a higher dose. I would stash the pills and save them. It seemed easier just to take these handful of pills, about 30 pills of 200 milligrams apiece, 6,000 milligrams total. I'll take these pills. It'll slow my respiratory system all the way down. I'll go to sleep and I won't wake back up. It's the easier route. Or do I take the route of regaining my life, regaining my deserved freedom, and fighting for that? Where would I start? Where would I begin? It was a slow process, but I chose to regain my life and to regain my deserved freedom in that moment. The pills fell to the floor. The hardest cry of my life. I picked the pills up. I flushed them down the toilet. I looked in the mirror. My face was stained with tears. And I think that's fair to say, not just a loose adjective. That's how heavy the tears were. They were stained with tears. I grabbed a wash rag, I wiped my face, and I looked myself in the mirror, and I made a decision that we all get to make. And I share that often when I travel and speak, that I was going to be a victor and not a victim, at least no more than a victim than they already made me out to be. It wasn't easy just because I decided to live opposed to die. It was very oppressive. It was very authoritative. It was very violent. It was very, very violent. A maximum level 5 prison, murderers, robbers, rapists, many of those individuals guilty of their crime. They were not done committing crimes. And so I had to be very, very careful about how I navigated through this treacherous ground of a level 5 maximum security prison. And if I wasn't ducking and dodging aggressive and violent individuals, I would then have to come in contact with very racist and oppressive officers. These prisons are often situated in rural areas. Most of those rural areas usually suffer some type of racism issue in those areas, and that is exactly what was happening in Mineral Point, Missouri, where Potosi Correctional Center was. They openly called you the N-word, and they was very, very, very open and vocal about what they felt, or rather how they felt about individuals with my skin color. It was a battle. It was a battle indeed. My family, they had a choice to fight or flee or flight. And my family, not having gone through this before, come from a pretty decent family stock, they just didn't know what to do. They did not fight. In the early years, they decided to flee. I remember calling home, talking to my daughter's mother, and I'm saying, hey, I need y'all help. What's going on? We was together just a few years ago, and she said to me, hello, life without parole, Rick? Hello? You're never coming home. You're never coming home. And the phone, it echoed over and over and over again, and I remember crying. And that's one thing that you want to try to minimize doing in prison, at least openly, is crying. But I cried. I could not hold it back. I remember standing at that payphone, essentially, with tears streaming down my face. She took the breath and the words out of me, and she just kept saying, hello, hello, are you still there? And I remember just hanging up the phone and walking away. Life without the possibility of parole. I sunk into myself for the next days, perhaps even weeks to come. But again, back in the mirror, looking at myself, reminding myself that I had the choice. I had the choice to become better, rather to not become a victim and instead become a victor. I remembered that, and so I got back to that. What next happened was I began to write letters and send out letters to churches, organizations, lawyers, anybody who would listen to my plea of innocence, and I would do them in stacks of 100. And then I would do a follow-up letter in stacks of 100. And I may get maybe one letter back, and that one letter would say, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. And if I was ever lucky to get 2 letters back, the second letter would say, here's a reference sheet of other people who you made contact. We're not the ones that can actually help you. It was enough to make you go back to the cell and go back to the original idea of taking your life. Again, violence to your right, oppression, racism to your left, and denials after denials, people refusing to hear my cry in front of me. It was daunting. It was extremely daunting. And might I remind you, I was a young, tender age of 22, 23, 24 at this time. but I would not relent. I would not quit. I recognized that I had an opportunity here to either rise to the occasion or sink underwater and ultimately drown. I wrote letters, and it took and the cavalry did not come instantly, but they did come. It took 10 years. In 2007, the Midwest Innocence Project heard my cry, along with Professor Sean O'Brien of UMKC, and a private investigator, Dan Grothaus, out of Kansas City. They all heard my cries around that time, took my case, and I felt like it is time to win. It is time to go home, that I knew it if I stuck it in, if I stuck it out, and if I kept on fighting, that I would have an opportunity to win. These people who are known for getting innocent people out of prison have taken my case. It's time to go home. We did that. We did that in 2009. I mean, the facts were damning. The facts were damning. One of the real killers had confessed. We had discovered evidence that the prosecutor personally withheld key evidence, knowing all along who actually committed the crime. We had information that the police department had participated in illegal procedure identifications. And we had the state witness who had sent me to prison. The only evidence, the only eyewitness who sent me to prison was now wobbling and on the verge of a recantation. It wasn't a full recantation at that point. It did come later in my 2019 hearing, but he was on the verge of, he certainly was caught in all his lies, that's for sure. We was able to go into court and prove that he is an outright liar, and that he should basically confess that he lied. He wasn't prepared to do that, but we had busted him. And so we went in court in 2009. The facts were so strong in my favor that the Missouri Attorney General's office could no longer argue that I was not innocent. All they could argue at that point was, well, the evidence might be good evidence, but he's time barred. Meaning he's out of time. He should have filed this many, many years later when this evidence was available. If you can recall, I told you that I had an overworked public defender who did not or was not able to flush out the evidence or the facts that sat there. Most of it sat there from the very, very beginning, the evidence that could have proved my innocence. But it did not come out to many, many, many years later. Would you be surprised? Would you be surprised if I told you that a part of my alibi was at the Jackson County Sheriff's Department? Here it is. I am in the building. I am in the unofficial custody. I wasn't taken in. I was applying for a handgun permit, but I was inside the Jackson County Sheriff Department at the time of the homicide. What better alibi could you possibly have? But it was not flushed out. The prosecutor pulled a sergeant who was not handling the case at the time to come in and make all type of assertions. But what my lawyer could have discovered and what my legal team did discover later was that there was a badge number at the bottom of one of the documents of the lady who actually processed my paperwork. We was able to reach out to her, the sheriff deputy, and she came and testified later that no way that this would have been on this date or that date. It would have been on the day that Mr. Kidd said, and it would have been during the time frame he said. She said, I'm the one that processed these. I know the time frame, and she reverse engineered the whole application when the facts came back through, and she solidified my alibi, at least a part of my alibi. I actually gave a full day account of my alibi as well. But that's what happened to me in my situation. It wasn't until 10 years after 2009, in 2019, we was able to get in front of a court. I lost 11 times before then. I lost 11 appeals before I finally won my very last appeal. And we was able to get in front of a judge, the Honorable Judge Darren Atkins, who was a leader who leads opposed to a leader who follows. He could have easily followed the denials of his other colleagues that I've been to prior to coming to his courthouse. But he said, I'm going to look at this case. I'm going to order a hearing. There is something to be seen here. And after the 4-day hearing, he concluded in a 107-page order, a damning order, that I indeed was innocent, who indeed was guilty, that the police participated in hanky-panky, and that the prosecutor maliciously withheld key evidence while she knew all along who likely had committed the crime. August 15th, 2019, I was finally released to walk in my freedom again. Since then, I've established my own company, I Am Resilience, a resilience training, motivational speaking, and criminal justice reform platform. I've crisscrossed the country all over, sharing the message of broken justice and resilience, in the spirit of being resilient, rather. It's been imperative to me. It's been imperative to me that I use my voice for those who voiceless, and that I use this freedom, this opportunity of my deserved freedom, to make a difference in the space of criminal justice reform. I want to talk to you all today about the origin of innocence and where I believe the origin of innocence derived from. Many people don't talk about this, nor do they put it in this context, and so it lessens our ability to understand the current state that we are in today. But if I take you back to the origin of innocence, where we would take or where it would dump us or drop us off would be hundreds of years back in the middle of slavery. Now, we know up north, different parts of the country, there was different things going on. Some people was free up north. Down south, many people were still considered slave. And if you was on that borderline there, they would grab you, snatch you, and take you south and say that you were not free, that you did not have your freedom papers. If you ever watched the movie 12 Years a Slave, if you have not, and if you get some free time, please watch the movie 12 Years a Slave. The individual was a free man. He had his papers. But what happened is they had snatched him up, the origin of innocence, snatched him up and accused him of not being a free slave. They took him back into slavery, and there he stood or worked and went through his nightmare for 12 years until he was finally able to find a way to prove that he had papers. The movie bears how that situation ended for him, but I wanted to take you back there as a start so you can understand, like, when did this really start happening? When did slavery, or rather, when did innocence really start taking effect on our country, and really across the country and in other countries as well? Not just here in America. If we move from slavery and we move into 1863, or where the Emancipation of Proclamation was generated, and it finally was passed in the year 1865, where it said that slavery was abolished and you were no longer considered a slave except for the 13th Amendment if we accuse you of a crime. If you commit a crime, then we can say no deal, and we can take back custody of you and put you back on these plantations again. Let's just unpack that real quick if we can. Slavery, unfair as it is, controlled primarily by Europeans or white individuals who tell the Black Americans or African Americans that you are free to go except for the 13th Amendment, which we created. We're controlling everything. So we're going to write this 13th Amendment, and we're going to throw this clause in there. And it's the moment we let you go, we can say that you committed a crime. Because who decides what the crimes are? The slave owners. Who will you go in front of once the crime has been alleged? The slave owners, the judges. Who will defend you? There was no lawyers to defend you. We was not entitled until we as citizens were not entitled to an attorney or to effective assistance of counsel until 1963, Gideon versus Wainwright. And so if we're talking 1865, we're talking 100 years. 100 years where everybody was supposed to be free. But if we say you committed a crime, even though you're innocent, then you've committed a crime with no way of proving that you committed a crime. Again, the accuser, probably white. The judge, probably white. The jury, probably white. The people who made up what the crimes are, reckless eyeballing, jaywalking, probably white. A lot of those individuals, even though they were not official sheriffs, a lot of them was deputized. And so it was easy to say this guy here or this gal here committed this crime, and there you was, innocent indeed, but ran through the justice system and subsequently found guilty. Most times in those days, probably hung on a tree or somewhere. And so I really wanted people to understand the context of not just where we are in the 21st century in 2021, but where we were then, and where you really say, that would be the origin of innocence, where the first cries of innocence probably rang to no avail. People would cry, but there was no recourse. There was no Innocence Project. There was no lawyers that you was entitled to unless you had money. Obviously, you did not have money, and so you would fall victim to a wrongful conviction many, many years ago before it was ever recorded. And so you can see in my case and in many other cases across the country why we are in the state that we are in now when it comes to wrongful convictions in America, as well as wrongful convictions across the country that is spread into other countries as well. The numbers are alarming. I would like to next turn your attention to the numbers, if I can. These alarming numbers. The U.S. prison population has ballooned to about 2.3 million individuals inside our prison system. That includes inside prison and either on probation or parole. Studies have come out for decades strongly suggesting that anywhere from 5 to 10% of the U.S. prison population is a result of a wrongful conviction. If we go more towards the conservative side, just to keep the debate down some and really get a solid point across and maybe some consensus where we could begin working on this problem, I like to stay right there at about 5%. You're still talking about 115,000 Americans languishing in prisons across the U.S. for crimes they did not commit. 115,000. That is a lot of people. If you divide them evenly into each state, which states would not divide evenly like that, that's not how it works, but for picture and context purposes, that'll be about 2,000 and some change of individuals in each state harboring and holding wrongfully convicted individuals. What is the numbers? What is the numbers to that other than the numbers of how many people is in prison? The cost numbers? The cost numbers run about $40 billion would it be over a course of 20 years. On average, that's pretty much the going rate of how long you stay in prison before you're able to prove your innocence. Me, 23 years. Daryl Burton, 24 years. Lamont McIntyre, 23 years. Many individuals, when you hear the story, there is some 10 and 13 years, but individuals usually spend a couple decades in prison before they're exonerated at the cost here in the Midwest region of the United States of about $20,000 a year. Depend on if you're on the East Coast or the West Coast, that can go up as much as $35,000 a year. So you're talking $20,000 to $35,000 a year housing the wrong person in prison for a crime they did not commit. We would then be talking about, in my case, $460,000 is what they cost, is what taxpayers paid to keep Ricky Kidd in prison for 23 years for a crime he did not commit. But if I can take your mind back to the numbers, 115,000 times 460,000, or maybe we could bump it up to keep the numbers even, $500,000. You're talking about $40 billion plus. $40 billion that the states are paying in the U.S. to keep innocent people in prison, and taxpayers are footing that bill. It is like you ordering food and then I take the tab. It's like you and I stand in a hotel, you come down from your room, you go order a whole bunch of stuff, and instead of putting it on your room 306, you put it on my room 307. I come down the next morning and suddenly I have a balloon tab for things that I had nothing to do with. So there's been no consequence to the state. There's been no consequence to the prosecutors who participate in this work, the police departments who participate in this work, or even the attorney generals who often defend the work, because none of them are paying the bill of what it costs to keep this vicious cycle of wrongful convictions going in the U.S. Those are the numbers that we're talking about. If you would like to fact check some of these, you can go to the National Registry. I believe it's the nationalregistry.com, or University of Michigan, Dr. Samuel Groth, Barry Scheck, Peter Norfield, many experts in the field have studied this stuff for many years. These are not my facts. These are their facts. I just study the facts, and I like to share them to bring awareness to us all. So those are some of the numbers that we're looking at when it comes to what it actually costs. I also want to highlight another damning point, a very, very damning point. In the last 31 years, since 1989, the National Registry have counted how many people have been exonerated within the U.S. It's roughly at about 2,700. I was going to check this morning, but it slipped my mind. It's roughly 2,700. I was number 2,503 when I came home in 2019. There has been an uptick and more people coming home. But just do the math for me real quick, if you would. 31 years, 2,700 individuals have come home. How many people did we say was believed to be wrongfully convicted? Over 100,000. That would mean that even though 2,700 people have come home, we would still have over 100,000 people to go back and get. If it takes 31 years to bring 2,700 people home, that means it would take 100 years to bring about 9,000 individuals home. It would take the next 100 years to bring about 9,000 individuals home. It would take 1,000 years to clear the books. 1,000 years. That's why I crisscross the country talking about this subject matter. That's why it's important that we not just take this as a lesson, as a student, but everyday people need to pay attention. That is a crisis. I call it a silent crisis in America because people don't necessarily see it as that is a crisis. We'll never fix the problem. May I also add into the fact that 5 out of every 100 new cases is believed to be a result of a wrongful conviction. And so if we have 100,000 individuals that's already underneath the rubble and debris, and we're trying to extricate them, we're trying to bring them out of that. Innocent Projects of London, Innocence Project all across the country, of Puerto Rico, inside the U.S., we're trying to bring these individuals from underneath the rubble, if they have not passed away already, from asphyxiation. We then have 5 out of every new cases, 5 out of 100 new cases is also a result of a wrongful conviction. It is a problem. It is a problem not just here in America, but all across the country. The alarm has not been sound, in my opinion. The issue has been discussed? Yes. Highlighting an innocent person here and there? Yes. But the alarm has not been sound. The math and the numbers has not been looked at it in the way that the data suggests and the data supports. It would take 1,000 years to clear the books and bring 100,000 individuals home, and we still would have work to do to plug the front end to make sure that 5 out of every 100 new cases is not a result of a wrongful conviction. If we have the gall and the forewithal to be able to collectively come together on this issue as we are today, this is a part of that. This is a part of what that looks like. And then the continued drumbeat of doing that. We can solve this problem. I'm very hopeful that the TED Talk community will reach back out to me in February and invite me. I've already begun the first process of it, phase 1 of it, and invite me to actually speak on this subject matter because that's how important this topic is. It is doable. It is fixable. We can fix this problem. We can most certainly fix this problem when we decide to look at it holistically, realistically, and then bind together collectively. This is something that we can do, ladies and gentlemen. As I round this off, I want to say this real quick. There's things that you can do as well. There are many things that we can do to make sure that wrongful convictions are not continuing to take place, not just in America, but anywhere around the country. Some of those things are what can you do as an individual? I'm talking about not prosecutors, not judges, not police officers. There's things that they can do too. But as the everyday individual, people often ask, Ricky, what can I do? And one of the things that I tell them is check your own bias. Check your own bias because there is an idea, there's a notion that they either did that they must be guilty, that they must done something else, or I see them as less than myself or who we are. Whether that's a suburban family, there's a disconnect when at the end of the day, these are human beings that are suffering one of the greatest suffers. These are human beings suffering one of the greatest things that a human being can suffer. I promise you that. So that's one thing you can do. Check your bias yourself, and then hold other individuals accountable. That's the second thing you can do, is pay attention to who your leaders are, to who your elected officials are. And if there's any indication that there's no integrity in their advocacy, if you've seen any hints or reports of that, when election time come around, hold them accountable. Let me give you a quick example. Eric Smith, here in Missouri, Attorney General, he fought my case, and that he was the one that knew I was telling the truth and was niggling over technicalities. He did it in another case, a guy named Jonathan Irons. Jonathan Irons is now free. WNBA star Maya Moore went back to get him. And then there's a guy named Lamar Johnson who is yet to be free, but St. Louis prosecutor Kim Gardner is fighting tooth and nail. The office that sent Lamar Johnson is fighting tooth and nail to get Lamar out. Guess who they're fighting against? Eric Smith, the Missouri Attorney General. Yet he won another election. We have to be able to say, wait a minute, you're not siding with the truth. You're not operating with integrity in your advocacy. We're not giving you our vote. When we fail to do that, then we help perpetuate the vicious cycle of wrongful convictions. One of the other things that you can do as an individual as well is decide to decide and do. Decide to become a volunteer. Decide, if you have disposable income, to help support innocent projects or these innocent outfits across the country that is doing the work. Again, get involved, donate. The least you can do, in my opinion, is help spread the word. When you see it come across your social media feeds, engage that content and help spread that content so the awareness levels can rise to the top. The last thing that I would like to say before I go in closing is that I believe this problem is ours to solve. I really do. I believe this problem is ours to solve. I could have easily come home, found me a lazy boy chair, sat in it, and just caught up on a couple years of Netflix. But I rolled up my sleeve, and I decided to hop into the fray. And I'm asking that you too join me in hopping into the fray. Excuse me. Making sure that you, again, volunteer, that you donate, that you tell your friends, that you engage social media. Even this year, my goal is to, last year we had a goal of reaching 10,000. I reached 100,000. This year, we're going to try to reach 1 million people. I need help being able to do that. Today, London, Greenwich, you have helped me do that today. Not just for the people in attendance, but this is being recorded. And then we'll share this video and so that other people can become aware, either through a direct presentation or through social media outlet. Let's do this together. We get to do this together when we decide to do it together. That is what I would say to you. My very last point before I take a sip of this water and clear my throat is that be sure to follow me. We have put the links in the chat. I believe it's at the beginning of the chat, and Don may put it at the end of the chat. It is resilienceMode.com. We put our link tree there where it has a whole bunch of links. You can see what I'm up to, and you can say to yourself, this guy is serious. When you go out, when you engage, when you support, it helps me continue my mission of spreading this word. Sometimes I'm running the race by myself, but cheerleaders are needed on the side. I ask, will you be those cheerleaders? Sometimes I'm running the race and I need somebody to run along with me. I'm asking, will you be one of those individuals that will run along with me? Sometimes there's ideas and innovative ways that I haven't thought of and that we need to come together and put together. I'm asking, will you be the source of those new innovative ideas and thoughts that have not been thought of before so that we can help put an end to the silent crisis of wrongful conviction? Keep fighting. Keep fighting. There's always a chance. There's always a chance. So just know that and this is for anybody. This is for the person who still may be in prison, but this is for the lawyer. This is for the advocate. This is for the student. If there's a chance to win, if there is a chance, then get in the ring. People say, Ricky, you had less than 1%. Let me please say this before we close. Less than 1% of individuals are ever successful on appeal. Less than 1%. And after I kept being denied, people kept saying, man, kid, give up. You're crazy. It's less than 1%. But you didn't tell me that it was impossible. 1% is a chance. And as long as there was a chance, there was a reason for me to keep getting up. If I had a chance, if you told me that there's no chance, if you told me that data and stats suggest that nobody ever gets out of prison, that would have got me. But the fact that you gave me a 1% chance and it was an opportunity that I stood up every day, I put my feet to the floor, I threw my hands up on my armrest. That it says no justice, no peace, and it's in a fighting stance. And so I tell people, I'm telling the people who's in prison waiting to come home, I'm telling the people who's fighting to bring those people home, as long as there's a chance, get in that ring and let's fight and see what happens at the end.